Over the last 18 months, there's one thing AEW has not shied away from, and that is signings. Admittedly, most of these talents end up being former WWE wrestlers, and most of them are signed as soon as their non-compete clause is expired. However, one of these signings didn't quite fit that criteria, and in terms of the general public, it's probably the biggest coup that AEW has to this day been able to achieve, and that is the signing of CM Punk. CM Punk's story within the wrestling world will be one of the most remembered of all time, for better or worse, and whether it's in a positive light or negative, everyone will remember the fallout between CM Punk and WWE. What everyone thought would be a short hiatus and eventual return slowly turned into the opposite, where most people believed we would never see CM Punk in a wrestling ring again. That all changed when AEW signed CM Punk and had him debut at The Last Dance on an AEW Rampage edition of all things, and I guess for most of us that have been watching, the rest has been history. His return to the wrestling world and his addition to AEW was very different from any other addition to the roster that we've seen. Most wrestlers that came in were active wrestlers. Most of them were wrestling for WWE months ago, so we knew what level they were at, and if you want to look at it kayfabe-wise, they were active a lot more recently. CM Punk came in 7 years out of the game. He had gone and done UFC, he'd had a couple of fights, but when you look at it in terms of the kayfabe of the wrestling world, CM Punk was out of action. CM Punk was rusty. He joined in an era where both Adam Cole and Bryan Danielson were also joining AEW, and instantly, specifically with Bryan, the comparisons were inevitable. Most people were saying, well, Bryan and CM Punk, right? Two of the best wrestlers of their generations joining AEW, they should be fairly similar. And I remember at the time, a lot of the questions that CM Punk would get answered is, well, Bryan Danielson's wrestling Kenny Omega for the AEW World Championship, and you're wrestling Darby Allin? I mean, it's not a bad match, right? Darby Allin is a respectable opponent, but you're not fighting at the top of the card. It's very strange. And I remember one line CM Punk said, and it stuck with me because I knew at that moment he had a plan, AEW had a plan, and it was all going to be fine. I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but it was something along the lines of, let me tell my story. Bryan is telling his story. Let me tell my story. It was at that moment I sort of knew CM Punk is going to be building up to a world title fight at some stage. I knew it was still very far away. And you got to remember, CM Punk's nearly been with the company for a year now, but it was inevitable that CM Punk was going to do his, not dream matches, but he was going to face the youngsters that he believed he could get something out of, that he could elevate. He knew that he had a couple of guys he wanted to work with before he built his name in AEW, before he shook the rust off and got back to what he was prior, and that was the best in the world. There was only actually a small window of opportunity for CM Punk to have matches with the younger guys and realistically almost put them over by having them nearly beat CM Punk. That window was very small because once in the kayfabe world, CM Punk shakes off the rust of his wrestling hiatus, he should be going back to one of the best wrestlers in the company. Of course, he's aged. Of course, there will always be that little bit of rust. He hasn't been wrestling consecutively for those 7 years, but realistically, a guy who held the WWE title for 400 plus days is going to be a guy who eventually finds his form and eventually should be one of the top guys in AEW. That was the natural form of progression. And I think that's what CM Punk was alluding to. Bryan was coming in as a made guy. He main evented WrestleMania that year. He had won world titles in the last few years. He was at the top of his game. He came into AEW as one of the premier wrestlers on that roster. So it made sense that he went straight into a world title match against Kenny Omega. Or I guess his match with Kenny was just a normal match. His match with Hangman was a world title match, wasn't it? Yeah, so I guess it was the normal match against Kenny Omega, then the world title match against Hangman Adam Page. That made sense because that's where Bryan was at the time. CM Punk is now at that stage, but he wasn't always at that stage. When he first returned, he really did have to grind and go back up through the ranks. This was a guy who had not been wrestling for 7 years. And it was so important that they took their time with CM Punk. And when you look at it now, when you look at it 9 months later, however long it's been, you look at it and you say, wow, that was really good that they slow played the rise of CM Punk. The last 6 months, there's been a few questionable things that AEW have done. There's a few booking decisions I haven't agreed with. There's a few things the company are doing now that I feel like 6 months ago, I was more happy with the company than I am today when it comes to judging the show as a whole. There's still many things that I enjoy, and there are things that I'm enjoying right now more than I was enjoying 6 months ago. But if you look at the entirety of Dynamite, I'm probably less happy with the product now than I was 6 months ago. But there's one thing that the company has done absolutely correctly, and that is the way they've handled CM Punk. And I'm sure CM Punk himself has something to do with it. And this was surely planned from the very beginning, that this is what we're going to do with you. We're going to give you 9 months to rebuild yourself, shake the rust off, obviously in terms of kayfabe, but also in terms of real life. Shake the rust off, learn what it's like to wrestle again, do some matches with different types of wrestlers. He wrestled Darby Allin, he wrestled Powerhouse Hobbs. He went through various different types of matches. He eventually wrestled MJF. He did a different type of match there as well. Get your feet wet, get yourself back into the world of wrestling, and we'll slowly build you up. And that's exactly what happened. For me, the rebuilding of CM Punk as a professional wrestler has been probably one of the most interesting parts of AEW Dynamite over the last 6 months. Seeing him go through those little lower card, mid card matches and slowly say and believe, yes, I am a top 5 guy. Yes, I am the #1 contender. Yes, I can beat the champion. This has been a very slow, very methodical, very, very careful journey back to the top for CM Punk, and that is something that I very much appreciate. They could have easily had CM Punk come in and within a month or two he was up there fighting for the world title. It was very, very easy. They could have even had him probably do what they did with Bryan Danielson, where they brought him in, he's already one of the top guys, forget about rebuilding him. But the fact that they decided to sit back and let the character just sort of breathe and let everybody just be familiar with CM Punk, let him enjoy it. I mean, remember when he was coming out, he was smiling, he was happy, he was just cheering with the crowd, and I'm so lucky to be here, and I want to help the kids, and that was great for the first like 4, 5, 6 months. That was perfect because it was just feel-good moment. You guys aren't sick of me talking yet. You remember all of that. That was the old CM Punk in AEW that we get. That is not the CM Punk we're getting now. He doesn't come out and say those things. He's coming out and saying, I'm world champion material. I think I can beat Hangman. He's in his face. There's shots being fired between the two. I mean, it's a great transformation. And the reason it's so good is it was gradual, right? It was almost unnoticeable. Before you knew it, CM Punk was, yes, a believable top guy in AEW. I don't even know if I can remember the moment where I realized he was no longer Happy Punk. It just sort of happened. It was just sort of a transformation, and that is absolutely beautiful. And for me, that is storytelling at its finest. It was such a gradual change that it was not even noticeable. For me, professional wrestling should always aspire to be like a sport. And in sports, you have this happening, right? You will have the gradual improvement of a player or improvement of a team. Not always. Sometimes they come out of nowhere. You know, sometimes all it takes is 1 or 2 weeks and a team will go from looking like they're not a championship contender to being a championship contender. But most of the time, it takes a season. It takes half a season for the players to gel, the team to play together, for the mentality of the coach to be instilled in the team. And then you get a championship team, right? It's a slow process. And that's the thing I love the most about what they've done with CM Punk. It's a slow process. We can look back at the last 9 months of his AEW career and say, yes, okay, this is where it started. He picked up a couple of wins here and there. He got battered and bruised. He's gotten stronger. He's gotten fitter. He's not getting gassed as much. These are all things we can look back and say, okay, yeah, he beat Darby. That's a really good win. He got a couple of wins here. That was a very nice win. MJF was a huge win. And it's a slow building process. It's one block after another. Very, very slow. Not just one massive slab. It's slow. It's gradual. And at the end of the day, that is what will make this so much more credible. Now, I don't know if he's going to end up beating Hangman Adam Page, but in my books, it's 50-50. He certainly can. He certainly can. He certainly can beat Hangman Adam Page. And right now, you'd probably say kayfabe-wise, obviously he's the champion. Hangman Adam Page should be regarded as the better professional wrestler, but that doesn't mean that CM Punk can't win that world title. And in fact, he's probably considered by many as the favorite going into it. Again, not because I think kayfabe-wise, he's viewed as the better professional wrestler. I think the reason he's a favorite is because most people believe that Hangman's reign should probably come to an end. But if you look at it kayfabe-wise, it's a 50-50. It's a coin toss. which doesn't happen much for the world title picture either, by the way. I mean, that's a that's quite rare where you go into a world title match at a pay-per-view and you don't know where it's going. That's quite different for the AEW world title. That's not something we've seen. Every single time this title has changed hands, it's been quite apparent that yes, this is the natural progression of the story. This is where we were going. This is where it was planned all along. Yes, it may be predictable, but this is what the story was. This is what it was written to be, and this is the way we're going. Whether it's Chris Jericho to Moxley, Moxley to Kenny, or Kenny to Hangman, it's always made sense. We've gone into the pay-per-view saying, yep, okay, this is the time it's going to change hands, but this is why, this is the story, this is the reason, and we like this. We enjoy this. This is a good story, and we've enjoyed it. This is the first time I'm going into an AEW World title match at a pay-per-view and thinking, I don't know who's going to win. I think CM Punk's going to win because, again, it just feels like Hangman Adam Page's run is coming to an end, but Hangman could very much win this match as well. The beauty of it is, though, CM Punk's been built to that level of a wrestler. He's been built where we can see that world title around his waist. Regardless of what happens and regardless of who wins, I've just very much enjoyed the fact that, in general, CM Punk was built up in the way that he wanted to. Again, going back to what he said, it was about how he wanted to write his story. Let Brian do his thing, and let me write my own story. And I like the fact that he was able to do that. I like the fact that they took their time to do that, and seeing the fruits of that labor, seeing the rewards of waiting for CM Punk's gradual rise up in AEW, it's been a good thing to watch. And I think why I feel like it's so important is it's probably captured the essence of what made AEW so good. And really what brought me to enjoying AEW's program in the very beginning was the long-term storytelling, the long-term booking, and the gradual rise of wrestlers. That's, I think, what I enjoyed the most when I started watching AEW was, okay, yeah, you can see a long-term plan for this guy, and throughout his journey from point A to point B, there's little checkpoints that you have to get through. So you go from a mid-carder to a main eventer, but there's a few things you have to do on the way, and we're going to do it slowly. And that's what I enjoyed so much about AEW is they took their time to let things stew and let things cook and let things just play out the way they are meant to play out naturally. And I think, again, what they've done with CM Punk is bringing me back to this is what makes AEW so good. And it keeps faith within the company that they're still able and willing to do this. Let me know what you think about CM Punk's rise, and let me know if you think he's going to beat Hangman Adam Page. For me, CM Punk is back to being a top at least 10 guy. Again, kayfabe-wise in the professional wrestling world. For me, he's been a top 10 guy since he beat MJF. Again, kayfabe-wise. And that's absolutely extraordinary that they've been able to do that in 9 months, build him up to be, in my opinion, a top 10 kayfabe professional wrestler in the world. Realistically, I would love to see him with that world title around his waist. If he doesn't win it, that's perfectly fine. But if he wins it, I'm very interested to see what they're going to do with CM Punk as the world champion. So let me know what you guys think is going to happen at the main event of Double or Nothing. Is CM Punk going to be the best in the world again? And is he going to hold a world title in AEW? If you did enjoy today's video, do leave a like so it does well in the algorithm. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed today's video and I hope you're having a good day. I'll see you guys in the next one soon. Peace.